Good morning. This hearing on the Committee of Agriculture regarding the examination of the costs and impacts of mandatory biotechnology and labeling laws will come to order. I've asked Bob Gibbs, gentleman from Ohio, to open us with a quick prayer. Bob?
Assume I add to your prayer. Our Heavenly Father, be with us today and give us the wisdom and the courage to do your will and try to make things better for everybody in our country as we work hard in the days ahead in this committee. So in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Bob, thank you, buddy. Appreciate that. Good morning. I want to thank each of you for being here today to discuss agricultural biotechnology. Mankind has used biological technologies for more than 10,000 years to improve crops and livestock, to make useful food products such as bread and cheese, and to preserve dairy products. When applied to plant breeding, these technologies have led to the evolution of nearly every food product we consume. These and other advances have enabled us to enjoy the safest, highest quality, most abundant, and affordable supply of food and fiber. As our knowledge has increased, so has the speed and precision in which we are able to harness natural capabilities to improve the plants that we cultivate. These new technologies, these new applications of biotechnology have been available to American and international consumers for nearly 3 decades. The safety of the technology has been confirmed by the world's leading scientific and public health organizations, including the World Health Organization, the National Academies of Science, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, the American Medical Association, and the Royal Society of Great Britain. Many scientists and farmers are optimistic and enthusiastic about the prospects of using scientific advances in biotechnology. The careful and precise addition of one or a few genes to a plant may make it more productive and nutritious, more tolerant to environmental stresses such as drought, and more resistant to disease and pests. These technologies can likewise improve the efficiency and therefore the productivity of agriculture, while at the same time reducing detrimental effects on the environment. This committee has frequently reviewed these technologies. We have reviewed the regulatory mechanisms in place since the Reagan administration and have been repeatedly assured by the absence of any valid concerns regarding the safety or quality of products derived from these production methodologies. Despite the facts that are universally on the side of this technology, we would have to search long and hard to find another issue matching the negative rhetoric and aggressive tactics of the distractors. In Washington and across the country, we're hearing a great deal of misinformation about so-called GMOs and the use of biotechnology in food and agriculture production. These unfounded attacks are not supported by the facts and mislead both consumers and policymakers. This information would threaten our farmers' ability to feed an ever-growing population and result in higher food costs for consumers. Biotechnology is an essential tool for farmers to have in the toolbox if we plan to feed an estimated 10 billion people by the year 2050 in an environmentally sound, sustainable, and affordable way. Unfortunately, threats exist to our ability to fully utilize this technology in the form of proposed federal and state laws, as well as some state laws that will soon be implemented if we don't act. A recent report by the Cornell Business School examined the consumer cost impact of a proposed mandatory label for biotechnology food products sold in the state of New York. According to the study, implementing a mandatory biotech labeling system in the state would mean new costs for consumers in the checkout aisle. The report finds that a family of 4 in New York could pay, on average, an additional $500 in annual food costs if mandatory labeling becomes the law. The state would also incur an estimated $1.6 million in costs from the writing and enforcing of new regulations and litigating potential lawsuits related to mandatory labeling, which could run as high as $8 million, and would also factor into the increased costs consumers see in their annual food bills. What this report does not reflect is the significant cost to food manufacturers associated with segregation and testing that would be passed back to producers. Nor does it address liability costs borne by food processors and producers under the activist scheme. As of today, 26 states have some form of biotech labeling legislation pending. These proposals are loaded with arbitrary and inconsistent policies which would create an unmanageable situation for food producers, processors, and distributors. Consumers would ultimately lose as a result of both higher food costs and the very real likelihood that the technological innovation that has filled our grocery stores with an abundance of high-quality products we enjoy would be stifled. As we examine the costs and impacts of states like Vermont, if states like Vermont move forward with mandatory labeling schemes, I think we will agree that congressional action to preserve interstate commerce through national uniformity is necessary. Although I will introduce our panel in its entirety after opening statements, I do want to take a moment to discuss one of our witnesses. Ms. Joanna Lidbach is a dairy farmer from the state of Vermont and the author of a well-read blog on farming, food, and rural issues. This is actually Ms. Lidbach's second appearance before the Ag Committee to discuss biotechnology. I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge Joanna's courage in returning, since some of you may be aware that after her appearance last year, Joanna and her family were the subject of harassment interfering with her young family's peace. I consider the tactics of anti-biotech activists who harassed you reprehensible and want to stress that this is shameful behavior, is not acceptable, and should not be tolerated. Joanna, thank you for being here with us today, and thank you for your dedication to support an issue. And with that, I recognize the ranking member for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for holding this hearing. This is an issue that I hope that we can find a way to address, because if we don't, we're going to have 50 states with 50 different labeling programs, and that's just not going to work. If we don't do something to stop this, we could end up with something similar to what's going on right now in California with their egg standards. Consumers have expressed their interest in knowing more about where their food comes from, and I think that's a good thing. But when it comes to labeling, we need to be able to find a smart way to balance this consumer demand, what we know about the safety of the foods that our farmers produce. If done correctly, I think we can find a workable solution. The Energy and Commerce Committee has most of the jurisdiction here, so at this point our hands are a little bit tied, but I do think it's important for us to move forward and to learn more about the impacts some of these state attempts at labeling genetically engineered food and food ingredients are going to have. So I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, and thank you for holding the hearing.
Thank you, Joan, the ranking member. Appreciate that. I recognize Subcommittee Chairman Roddy Davis for his statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to all the witnesses that are here today. And Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing on the costs and impacts of the mandatory biotech labeling laws. And I'd like to welcome one of my constituents who is on the panel, Mr. Lynn Clarkson. Very glad you're here, representing the small town of Cerro Gordo very, very well. Clarkson Grain, your company, turned 40 just last year. Supplies grain to food manufacturing, animal feed industries, as products include corn, whole grains, and non-GMO grains and oil seeds. I appreciate your testimony about respecting all viewpoints and lowering the temperature in this very heated debate. I have two distinct memories from the subcommittee hearing that I chaired last year that Mrs. Lidbach was a part of. First of all, we discussed the needs of biotechnology, and it helps us feed a growing population, reduces negative impacts on our environment, and also helps combat plant and pest diseases. But the rhetoric, as Chairman Conaway said, became pretty charged after the hearing. I was disappointed by this rhetoric and misinformation and the personal attacks leveled not only at you, but to those who were part of the hearing, including me. Thanks for coming back. I know you did receive some rude comments and some bullying on social media, and I really appreciate hearing your perspective as a dairy farmer and as a father of 3 children myself. I appreciate hearing your perspective as a mother. Lastly, on the right to know argument, consumers can already find out information when they are at the grocery store. Food that is labeled as USDA certified organic does not contain genetically modified ingredients. I want to read something from the New York Times editorial just a couple of years ago. Consumers can already find products free of GMO ingredients with labels voluntarily placed by the manufacturers. For those who want to avoid such ingredients, the surest way is to buy products certified as organic under federal standards. And this is the New York Times, not necessarily a hotbed of conservative rhetoric on their editorial board. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Thank you. Now I recognize the ranking member on the subcommittee, Ms. Delbini.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you holding this hearing, and I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today. As the ranking member on the subcommittee, this is an issue I hear about very often, not only here, but also in my district back home in Washington State. In fact, Washington State was among the states which recently voted on a GMO labeling initiative, and one of the biggest takeaways for many of us from that initiative, as well as this debate generally, is that there needs to be more of a dialogue and more education done on all sides. I certainly agree that consumers have a right to know what they're eating, and I also believe that we need to be clear and take a science-based approach when we're discussing GMOs. Just as many of us implore folks to look at the science behind climate change, for example, we can't pick and choose. We need to understand the science and its findings, including in this case. Genetically modified doesn't mean just one thing or just one company. And as someone who started their career in biomedical research, I understand that this technology has the potential to provide benefits to consumers. However, we also need to ensure that we're having an open conversation about its impacts and its challenges. This is often an emotional argument, and it's my hope that moving forward we can have it be more of a fact-based, open discussion on all sides. I'm looking forward to the testimony of our panel today, and I'm hopeful that we can move closer to a workable solution as a result for everyone. So thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing, and I yield back.
Thanks, Gentlewoman. The chair would request that other members submit their opening statements for the record so that witnesses may begin their testimony and to ensure there's ample time for questions. I'd now like to welcome to our witness table the following witnesses. We have Mr. David Schmidt, President CEO of the International Food Information Council here in D.C. We have Dr. Nina Fedorov, the Senior Science Advisor, OFW Law Firm here in D.C. We have Ms. Joanna Lidbach, owner, the farm at Wheeler Mountain, on behalf of Agrimark Dairy Cooperative, the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, and the National Milk Producers Federation from Westmore, Vermont. We have Mr. Lynn Clarkson, President, Clarkson Grain Company at Sierra Gorda. Is that close enough? In Illinois. Mr. Thomas Dempsey, CEO, Snack Food Association in Arlington, Virginia, and Mr. Chris Polosinski. I butchered that, Chris. Sorry about that. President, CEO, Land of Lakes in Arden Hills, Minnesota. Mr. Schmidt, begin when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chairman Conaway. Distinguished members, I'm David Schmidt, President and CEO of the International Food Information Council, Biotech. We effectively communicate science-based information on food safety and nutrition issues to health professionals, journalists, educators, government officials, and consumers. We are fortunate to receive support for our programs from leading food, beverage, and agricultural companies, but I must clarify that we don't represent those industries. Last year, IFIC conducted the 2014 Consumer Perceptions of Food Technology Survey. It was our 16th such survey since 1997. The survey polled 1,000 adults who are reflective of the U.S. population according to the U.S. Census Bureau. Our survey begins with open-ended questions which are more reliable when it comes to taking the real pulse of consumers than surveys with a small number of carefully worded questions designed to provoke concerns. When it comes to food labels, the results show that biotechnology, or even the phrase GMOs, is not a top-of-mind concern for the vast majority of consumers. Following the open-ended questions, we get more specific about biotechnology and genetic engineering, but please note that we do not use the term GMO for two major reasons. Number one, the U.S. FDA has provided labeling guidance to industry, reaffirmed as recently as April 2013 that the scientifically accurate terms are bioengineered, genetically engineered, or foods produced using biotechnology. Their analysis considers the term genetically modified organism, or GMO, as potentially misleading to consumers because it is a distinction without a difference. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, humans have been genetically modifying crops and animals for tens of thousands of years. Number two, our own consumer research since the early 1990s has found GMO, as a phrase, to be off-putting at best or even frightening to many consumers. And unfortunately, in today's marketplace, it is used as something to avoid and a pejorative rather than a way to inform consumers. When first asked if people were avoiding any particular foods or ingredients in their diet, only 2% of total respondents mentioned biotech food or even similar terms like GMOs. Then we asked them if they could think of any information that currently is not on food labels but should be. 3/4 of them, 75%, said no. Just 4% said that labels should carry information about genetic engineering or related terms. 2/3 of Americans said they were confident in the safety of the food supply. When we asked people about their specific food safety concerns, biotech or any related term was far down the list at 7%. When we asked the respondents to offer their impressions of food biotechnology before mentioning any benefits, there was an almost even split between 28% who were favorable and 29% unfavorable, with more than 4 in 10 either neutral or didn't know. The survey then asked about which sources of information on food biotechnology consumers trust most. Health organizations, cited by 50% of consumers, ranked first, followed by federal government agencies and health professionals at 45% each. We then focused on attitudes toward particular benefits of food biotechnology. Referring back to my point on language above, it is not surprising that consumers may shy away when provoked to be concerned about, quote, genetically modified organisms in your food, unquote. But notice the difference in support when we use more informative language to explain some of the benefits of the technology. 72% said they were likely to purchase products made with oils modified by biotechnology to provide more healthful fats. 69% were likely to buy such products if they were modified to reduce the potential for carcinogens. And 69% also said they would buy bread, crackers, cookies, cereals, or pasta made with flour modified to use less land, water, and or pesticides. Next, we returned to labeling issues and tried to get at consumers' attitudes another way by asking whether people favored the current FDA policy regarding foods produced using biotechnology. We told them the policy requires special labeling only when biotechnology's use substantially changes the food's nutritional content or when a potential safety issue, such as a food allergen, is identified. Otherwise, special labeling is not required. 63% of respondents supported the current FDA policy, while 19% opposed it. In fact, every survey we have conducted since 1997 has found a strong majority of Americans support this FDA labeling policy. When we looked more generally at the most favored uses of food biotechnology, reducing pesticide applications topped the list, followed by keeping food prices stable and helping feed undernourished people around the world. Mr. Chairman, in closing, let me emphasize that in our nearly 2 decades of consumer research, we've learned that consumers are supportive of the many benefits of food and agricultural biotechnology when clearly articulated. The food label is not a playground for every bit of information someone might want to know. We rely on the FDA to ensure that the precious real estate available on a food label is reserved for important health, ingredient, and nutrition information, and it is clear that a strong majority of Americans have confidence in the FDA's labeling policy for foods produced using biotechnology. Thank you for this opportunity to share consumer perspectives.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Dr. Fedorov?
Chairman Conaway, Representative Peterson, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I'm Nina Fedorov. I'm a professor of plant molecular biology and genetics. I have had 35 years of experience with GM techniques. I'm a member of the U.S. National Academy of Sciences and National Medal of Science laureate. I served as Science and Technology Advisor to Secretaries of State Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton. I authored a book titled Mendel in the Kitchen, A Scientist's View of Genetically Modified Foods. I'm here to tell you why mandatory labeling of foods containing GM ingredients will not help Americans make healthful food choices. More than that, I will tell you why such labels could well undermine humanity's efforts to achieve food security. Now, a recent Pew poll of scientists and the public gave startling results. Only 37% of the public believes GMOs are safe, as compared with almost 90% of scientists. So why are scientists convinced? GM crops have been in commercial production for almost 20 years. They have an impeccable safety record and multiple environmental benefits. They've boosted farmers' incomes and reduced consumer prices. These are the facts, and they've been documented in independent studies referenced in my written testimony. Scientific academies around the world concur that modern methods of genetic modification are as safe as those used by previous generations of plant and animal breeders. Now, until the development of modern GM techniques, breeders had to depend on either rare natural or more recently induced mutations, that's just another term for genetic modifications, to develop better crops. Today, we know enough about genes to introduce a desired trait into an already highly productive plant or animal without the undesirable downsides of older methods. Now, it's worth pointing out, as the chairman did, that the history of plant and animal genetic modification extends back more than 10,000 years. We created corn, not Mother Nature. We created big, luscious, heirloom tomatoes. Mother Nature's are tiny and can be deadly. Now, the FDA just approved Simplot's GM potato that won't turn brown after you cut it. And more importantly, it contains less of a natural amino acid that turns into a toxic compound, acrylamide, when the potatoes are French fried in hot oil. These potatoes will be more healthful and less wasteful. But today, more than 60% of Americans believe that GMOs are unsafe and probably wouldn't choose to buy them. Now, why is that? The reasons lie in the increasingly strident efforts of determined anti-GMO activists to convince the public that GMOs are bad. Some of these folks and many other, some of these are the most prominent among these are the NGOs such as Greenpeace and marketers of organic foods. A recent, meticulously researched organic marketing report documents how organic marketers have progressively demonized GMOs while advancing organically grown foods as more healthful than conventionally grown food. Now, some of these folks and many other kinds of anti-GMO activists have openly stated that labeling will help them drive GMOs out of the market. Now, the facts are these. Organic produce is no more nutritious than conventionally grown produce. It's more expensive because organic farming is land inefficient and labor intensive. The organic industry's false and misleading marketing are a primary reason why consumers believe GMOs are bad and organic food is good. Attaching a GM label provides no consumer benefit since GM foods are as safe and nutritious as their non-GM counterparts. But attaching a label will send the false message that there's something to worry about because the FDA's labels are there to alert consumers to food ingredients with health implications. Now, my final point is that there are serious humanitarian implications should the current GMO vilification efforts succeed in driving GM technology out of agriculture. Global agricultural productivity increases are even now lagging behind population growth, and that's without figuring in the increasingly negative impacts of climate warming. Now, the future lies in agricultural intensification. We will need to produce more crop per drop of water and square meter of land. Genetic modification of plants, in which the U.S. currently leads, will be the key to feeding the 9 or 10 billion people we expect for dinner in just a few decades. We cannot afford to discard the best methods we've ever invented to continue growing the food supply and doing it more sustainably. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Federoff. Ms. Lidbach, thanks again for coming, and let me reiterate my earlier comments. It's reprehensible. We can have differences of opinion, but to attack people...
They're our own facts.
Yes, ma'am, and even when they're not based on facts, you can still, but to resort to name-calling and threatening and other less genteel kinds of ways is reprehensible. So thank you for signing up for a second round. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson, and other members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm here on behalf of Agrimark Dairy Cooperative, the National Council of Farmer Co-ops, and the National Milk Producers Federation. My husband and I have a small 50-cow dairy located in northeast Vermont. We also make extra hay to sell. We raise Jersey steers to process and sell beef locally, and we market a small amount of composted manure. We have 2 young boys, ages 3 and 2. My husband and I are both proud to be first-generation dairy farmers. We believe in the science and capability of biotechnology and its role in protecting the sustainability of our farm. Biotech crops are essential to feeding our cows and calves. We feed both GMO corn and soy products year-round, along with pasturing, a grass-based silage, and hay. I believe that biotech varieties improve efficiency and productivity of farming. In my written testimony, I mentioned that I could not find a non-GMO option available to me, but I have since found it. The non-GMO feed would cost $589 per ton. The same conventional feed we currently feed is $333 per ton. On our small farm, we purchase about 16 tons of grain per month, and if you do the math, that's a difference of about $4,100 a month, or $49,000 a year. If there are any dairy economists here, this is the equivalent of $1,000 per cow on our farm. I don't see how we could profitably farm with those increased feed costs. As a small farm just starting out, we are constantly exploring new opportunities to grow our business. One of the things we have been looking at recently is growing our own corn and alfalfa. In our short growing season, genetically engineered seeds offer the best options for us. Incidentally, over 97% of the corn grown for silage in Vermont is a biotech crop. I personally believe that there's room for many different styles of farming. I also believe that biotechnology will play a major role in our ability to feed a growing world and to make improvements on our own individual farms. Certainly, as a dairy farmer, increasing feed costs would have a devastating impact on my business. But beyond our farm gate, we know the impact would be just as brutal. In my area of rural northeast Vermont, 80% of the children in our elementary school receive free or reduced price school lunches. It is their families who would suffer the most from price increases caused by mandatory biotech labeling. As a mother and a consumer, I do not purchase organic or non-GMO food in the store since I would be paying more with no added nutritional, health, or environmental benefits. I firmly believe the food I feed my 2 growing boys is safe. You must be aware that recently my state of Vermont passed a mandatory GMO labeling law. In New England, it's very easy to cross borders for various reasons, such as grocery shopping. If the Vermont labeling law is activated, there will likely be one label on food in Vermont and another on the exact same food in New Hampshire, raising questions about whether or not the product is actually the same. Furthermore, the Vermont law exempts meat and dairy from being labeled. Other states may not exempt those products as they consider their own GMO labeling bills. Doing so will affect my ability to market my USDA-certified Jersey beef across state lines. This serves no one's interests, not consumers, not farmers, not food producers. I am happy to continue to speak up for our right to farm in whatever way we choose, which in our case includes biotechnology and the use of GMOs. It's important to continue the conversation about the opportunities and challenges we face as modern-day farmers and parents. When I have one person or 10 people reach out to me for a question or appreciating my practical perspective from the farm, then I have succeeded. Sometimes this isn't an easy task. As the chairman mentioned, I testified at a subcommittee hearing on this very topic last summer and received some very rude comments from total strangers on social media and phone calls from them in the middle of the night. It was not always the most pleasant experience, but being a dairy farmer, I'm used to having to do unpleasant jobs from time to time. Even with those negative encounters, or maybe because of them, I was eager to come back and share my experiences today. I'm proud of how far the American farmer has come, just as I'm proud of how far we've come on our own farm. If my sons choose to continue in farming, I want to know that my husband and I have provided them with a firm foundation to build on. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here with you today.
Thank you, Mr. Buck. Appreciate that. Mr. Clarkson.
Chairman Conway, Ranking Member Peterson, other members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here today. I'm president of Clarkson Grain Company, located in Cerro Gordo, Illinois. Clarkson Grain was founded in 1974 by the Clarkson family, pioneering direct delivery marketing to link farmers directly to end users. From that beginning, we've grown into a grain, oilseed, and ingredient supplier, to manufacturing companies making food and animal feed with clients around the world. The company procures its raw materials, primarily corn and soybeans, from farmers in the United States and Canada. We operate our own commercial storage, cleaning, handling facilities, barge station, rail siding. Our products include corn, soy flours, masa, lecithin, whole grains, organic, non-GMO, and GMO. United States farmers excel in delivering the lowest cost agricultural products within a grade standard acceptable to clients. Since our inception, we've segregated corn and soy by variety and market distinction to realize greater value for producers and end users. Buyers of these identity-preserved grains are now asking for features that guarantee their access to particular markets such as GMO-specific, non-GMO, and organic. Such buyers range from small family companies to the largest food manufacturers. Shipments range from a small bag to 55,000-ton vessels. These market preferences increasingly define both our domestic and international markets. To secure corn and soy sought by these buyers, we contract with farmers before planting to get particular varieties raised in accord with buyers' wishes. We secure grower cooperation by paying premiums. Our goal is simple: a happy client. We're not in the business to win a scientific argument or a political argument. We're in business to please clients seeking legitimate product distinctions. We don't tell clients what they should want. We ask them what they want and try to get it for them. As an IP merchant, Clarkson Grain is not at all opposed to the development and commercialization of GMO crops. Producers and their supply chain partners, however, need to recognize that production and handling of any crop has to be conducted in such a way that preferred market access is recognized and honored. Neighboring farmers must have the ability to serve their preferred markets, whether GMO, non-GMO, or organic. Market access and choice are critical to this. Wherever you fall on the GMO spectrum, it's clear to me as an ingredient supplier that an increasingly significant percentage of consumers want additional transparency in labeling. These consumers, the GMO sensitive, have certainly proved themselves to be a significant and vocal voice for transparency in labeling. The cost of disregarding this voice is increased social conflict, expensive political battles, and uncertainty provided by prolonged court cases. For farmers who use GMOs, this process prolongs the difficulty for the biotech industry to bring traits responsibly into the market. Everyone would win if we could lower the temperature and manage the conflict over GMO technology. One critical way to lower the temperature is through a rational, uniform national standard for the labeling of food that is not produced using GMO traits. Such an action is in the fundamental interest of both consumers and farmers. Consumers have a right to exercise their choice and avoid. Farmers have a right to take advantage of this new market. The creation of a standard could be accomplished through a mandatory labeling scheme, but it's my belief that a much more appropriate approach is through a voluntarily labeling program. I believe that such approach would be less contentious, less adversarial, and less expensive. I believe we're in a similar place to where we were with the emerging organic market in the early 90s. At that time, differing state standards for organic products were emerging. The result was consumer confusion. Independent companies jumped in, more confusion. Each one was saying their standard was better than the next. So it was a negative for the entire sector. Once the organic sector settled on a uniform national definition, responsibly overseen by the USDA, consumer confidence returned and served as the fundamental rationale for explosive growth. It's my belief the non-GMO market would also grow if it had a uniform national standard. Overseen by the USDA has a world-class reputation of managing process-verified programs. It seems to me straightforward. Let Congress establish a uniform standard, let USDA oversee it, step back and let the marketplace work as it does. To sum up, I want to offer one more rationale for establishing a uniform standard. Labeling drives other activities along the supply chain, such as seed production. Many producers struggle with a lack of appropriate GMO seed. For all these pieces to work together within a reasonable time frame, farmers must have access to an adequate supply. So in closing, I ask for several things. One, Congress to support a farmer's freedom to produce for his preferred markets without being dominated by his neighbor's market decisions. I ask Congress to support through adequate funding research in non-GMO corn and soy varieties. I ask Congress to support a farmer's choice of hybrids or quality attributes, GMO presence or absence, or organic or non-organic. I ask Congress to help those of us in the countryside to always balance and respect the producer's production decisions as they provide a safe and abundant food supply for the world's needs. Thank you. I'll be happy to answer your questions later.
Thank you, Mr. Clarkson. Mr. Dempsey.
I'd like to thank the committee, Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson, for holding this hearing to provide a balanced review of one of the most critical issues facing the food industry today, the labeling of genetically modified organisms, or GMOs. My name is Tom Dempsey. I have served as the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Snack Food Association since 2013. Prior to joining SFA, I was the President of one of the largest privately owned snack brands in the United States. We represent over 400 companies in the snack industry. My members include both billion-dollar multi-category companies and small family-owned businesses in the second and third generation of management. More than half of SFA members have sales of less than $100 million a year, and many are the primary employers in their communities. Mandatory GMO labeling would impact nearly every aspect of my members' businesses, upping costs by requiring increased product inventory, added complexity for packaging and distribution processes, and extensive new regulatory and training requirements. Absent a federal solution, manufacturers will have essentially three options to comply with the state GMO labeling law: redesign their packaging, reformulate products so that no labeling is required, or halt sales to that state. Each option is difficult, costly, time-intensive, and at worst could eliminate jobs and consumer choice in the marketplace. Smaller companies may not have these options at all. A patchwork of mandatory GMO labeling laws would pose significant burdens on the manufacturing process itself. They would require separate storage for GMO and non-GMO products throughout the entire supply chain, beginning with the farmer and extending through the various stages of production and distribution. Aside from new administrative and record-keeping burdens, snack makers would be forced to clean and boil the sheeting, baking, frying, and seasoning lines between GMO and non-GMO production runs, with extensive time-costly delays. Duplicative film labeling would, for the same stock-keeping unit, or SKU, assigned to each product line is also a problem. Film, the industry's term for snack bag packaging, would need to be changed mid-production, and 2 separate inventories of the same finished product must be kept. If 1, 5, 10, or 25 states enact different GMO labeling laws, this process would become even more burdensome and difficult to comply with, particularly from an interstate commerce perspective. Significant lead times and costs would also go into bag changes. The cost in plate charges, new film, and administrative oversight could be more than $750,000 for 800 SKUs, and the process could take 20 to 26 weeks. GMO and non-GMO producers must continue to be segregated by state from the factory to the grocery store, resulting in increased distribution costs and heightened opportunity for mistakes. To be clear, the hardest hit by this will be one-plant operators with a single line of production. These costs could put family-owned businesses out of business by increased consolidation in the industry. While it is sometimes assumed that companies could remove GMO ingredients from their products, this is unrealistic because the availability of non-GMO crops, as you've heard, is limited. Over 80% of the corn, cotton, and soybean crops in the United States are produced with biotechnology, all of these products which are staple items in the snack food production. Our members will not have the opportunity to increase their contracts with farmers or mills for non-GMO corn, for instance, for over 2 years. Transitioning to GMO-free production will not happen overnight. Some manufacturers may choose to end distribution in states that require GMO labeling, resulting in fewer product options for consumers and causing a ripple effect in the grocery industry. Even if manufacturers notify grocers of their intent to stop selling in a state, manufacturers could run the risk of being fined if retailers do not comply or if mistakes happen in the distribution process. Fewer players in the aisle could mean less incentive to keep quality high and prices low. Fewer products could disproportionately cause job losses for some in the distribution chain. Ultimately, a patchwork of state GMO laws will hit consumers the hardest and will result in either increased costs at the grocery store or less availability of products on store shelves. Current federal law mandates food labels for safety and nutritional purposes. And because GMOs, as you've heard, have proven to have no material difference than non-GMOs, there is no food safety or nutritional difference that requires an additional label. Going down a path which calls for mandatory GMO labels sets a bad precedent for future calls for mandatory labels for issues that are not related to food safety or nutrition. Consumers already have the option to purchase non-GMO foods, and these options continue to expand. For over a decade, both the USDA's National Organic Program and the Independent Non-GMO Project have certified that foods are organic and GMO-free, respectively. Many SFA members have already made this significant investment and marketing decision to display these voluntary labels. Forcing companies to relabel more than 80% of their products does nothing but add cost, confusion, and may limit consumer choices. SFA does not have a single member company that manufactures, distributes, and sells in just one state, which makes the state labeling law incredibly complex. Multiply these challenges by 5, 10, or 25 states, and an insurmountable burden is placed on the supply chain. SFA supports a voluntary labeling standard, which eliminates the proposed patchwork of state laws and allows the market forces that are already in place to continue to inform the consumer. As more and more states continue to pursue different mandatory GMO labeling laws, manufacturers and consumers alike need the consistency of a federal standard, and we need it urgently. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Dempsey. Mr. Polisinski? Chris? Right down 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Conaway, Ranking Member Peterson, and members of the committee. Thank you for holding today's hearing on the costs and impacts of mandatory biotechnology labeling laws. I appreciate the opportunity to testify on this important issue. I'm Chris Polisinski, President and CEO of Land O'Lakes. I also serve as Chairman of the National Council of Farmer Cooperatives, and I'm a board member of the Grocery Manufacturers Association. Land O'Lakes, based in Arden Hills, Minnesota, is a farmer-owned cooperative, meaning it is owned, governed, and controlled by farmers and local agricultural cooperatives. Land O'Lakes touches more than 300,000 farmers across the country making us well-positioned to understand the benefits of biotechnology and the impact of measures designed to mandate the labeling of GMO products. Biotech crops have been around for 2 decades and provide extraordinary benefits to farmers and consumers. Higher crop yields per acre, less tilling of the land, decreased use of natural resources such as water and land, reduced use of insecticide, better soil quality, and lower consumer prices are just some of the benefits GM crops provide. Despite these benefits and the proven safety of GMOs, some are pushing for states to pass laws that would mandate the labeling of GMO foods. We are told this is about consumer choice, but consumers already have these choices and many others. Some choose to pay a premium for food that is produced by certain methods, such as organic, or does not contain certain ingredients, such as those that are gluten-free. Others prioritize affordability, accessibility, convenience, or taste. Voluntary labeling currently presents all of these choices in the marketplace, and that's the model that should exist for GMO labeling as well. Mandating GMO labeling runs contrary to the essential purpose of government-mandated labeling, which is to provide consumers with accurate and relevant information regarding the safety of the food they eat. Every major health and regulatory organization has found that GMOs are as safe as any other food, and as such do not require any special labeling. Mandated GMO labeling is an effort to stigmatize a form of technology and an attempt to drive it out of the marketplace. You don't have to take my word for it. 2 months ago, an activist association published an article admitting that the push to enact statewide GMO labeling is part of a larger effort to drive GMOs off the market. In addition to stigmatizing biotechnology, a state-by-state patchwork of mandated food labeling laws would be a logistical nightmare, creating dozens of different standards, different definitions, and different exemptions. Fortunately, Congress has the authority and the responsibility to protect the free flow of goods across state lines. Uniformity in our nation's food labeling ensures consumers have consistent, accurate information on dairy, poultry, meat, and other foods. Under federal preemption, Congress can create a voluntary, uniform, national solution to the labeling of food products derived from ingredients using biotechnology. The value of this approach is that it not only respects a consumer's right to choose, but it also respects a farmer's right to choose to use a safe, proven technology. Stigmatizing GMO foods through a patchwork of state labeling mandates or even mandatory federal labeling jeopardizes innovation and threatens the future of development and use of technology in agriculture. As a result, farmers will have fewer choices of what to plant, we'll see higher costs due to crop segregation, lower yields, a decline in productivity, and an increased environmental footprint. That's dangerous for everyone. And this threat is real and imminent. There is currently some form of GMO labeling legislation pending in over half of our state legislatures, and Vermont's GMO labeling mandate is scheduled to take effect next year. That's why I strongly urge Congress to enact a common-sense law that will provide farmers and consumers with the clarity and certainty needed for meaningful, voluntary food labeling. Last year, our company supported the Safe and Accurate Food Labeling Act, and we understand that similar legislation will be introduced soon. Updates to the bill from last year may include the creation of a voluntary non-GMO certification program run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. We would support such a provision, which would ensure that consumers get accurate information while preserving choices available to shoppers and farmers. Thank you again for the opportunity to testify before this committee. I look forward to working with each of you this year to pass a common-sense solution that meets the demands and expectations of the American people.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate that. Chair would remind members that they will be recognized for questioning in order of seniority for members who were here at the start of the hearing. After that, members will be recognized in order of arrival, and I appreciate everyone's cooperation. With that, I would like to yield my 5 minutes to the subcommittee chairman, Rodney Davis. Rodney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, with a constituent in the room, I'd like to start my questioning with Mr. Clarkson. Again, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. In your testimony, you touch on this, but do you prefer that producers be able to voluntarily market their products as biotech, non-biotech, or both? And should either of these marketing claims be mandated?
I prefer that the farmer have choice to pick his market. I wouldn't mandate. I would do what I could to protect the integrity of his product. it gets into the issues of cross-pollination and seed purity and other issues, but I think it should be an entirely voluntary process.
Well, thank you very much for your response. In your testimony, you also say everyone would win if we could lower the temperature on biotechnology. And this is a very important point that I think many touched on in their opening statements. Can you expand on this, Mr. Clarkson? And as the labeling debate continues, what advice do you have in communicating with the many stakeholders that could help bridge the gap between those who support biotech and those who don't?
Well, the emotion of this issue carries a lot of people away into unfortunate behaviors, which my colleague on the panel was subjected to last year. The fundamental interest here in the consumer making a choice. Consumers don't choose their food entirely on safety at all. They make consumer choices in all sorts of values. I think that should be honored. It's created a market for the farmer that currently is paying him about a 15% premium, 10 to 15% premium to offer non-GMO, and 3 times as much as conventional to offer organic products in the marketplace. If we can respect the fundamentals that interest that seems to be driving the emotion around the marketplace is to be able to detect GMOs in the grocery store. If we set up a voluntarily labeling program, we define it, make it standard around the United States, I think that gets everybody into paddling the canoe in the same direction. Let people make their choices.
Thank you very much for your responses. Ms. Lidbeck, I have 3 school-aged children at home. There's obviously a lot of false information about the health and safety of biotech crops that is driving this debate, and we both saw that after the subcommittee hearing last year. Can you expand on why these products are safe for your children and also mine?
Thank you. Yep. Food made with genetically engineered crops happen to be the most rigorously tested portion of the food that's available out there, and so people can rest assured. I can rest assured. You can rest assured that that they're safe. They're no more risky than other conventional non-GMO or organic counterparts.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Policinski, did I pronounce that semi-correctly?
You did.
Oh, thank you, thank you. You run one of the largest farmer-owned companies in the country. Why has your company made investments in biotech, and what does labeling mean for food and agricultural companies like yours?
Yeah, our farmers have embraced biotechnology faster than any technology in history, and they've done that because the benefits to their economics on farm, the environment, less land and water use, less crop protection products use, and to consumers are so readily apparent. So this technology is central to the way our farmers, our farmer owners, operate their businesses. So we've embraced that in terms of the way we manage our business. We have a business unit called Winfield Solutions that sells seed and crop protection products to farmers. We sell all types of seed and crop protection products to farmers. We sell biotechnology, biotech traits. We sell conventional seeds. So we believe in farmer choice. And it's been a good business for our farmers. It's been a good business for us, and it's good for the consumer in terms of the benefits of lower costs and a lower environmental footprint.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you all for your testimony. And Mr. Chairman, I have one question for the panel, but I'll wait till my turn. So I'll yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ranking members recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Clarkston, critics of the voluntary labeling say that it will not address consumer demand for labeling and will create additional consumer confusion. And I frankly can't understand that. USDA's organic program has been out there, and it seems to me it's met consumer expectations. If it hasn't, how can we have a $35 billion organic market in the U.S.? What am I missing here?
Congressman, I don't think you're missing a thing. I think you're right on the money on that. I think the organic program is certainly getting support because people believe in it. It's a voluntary label. I think a voluntary label would take care of the underlying consumer interest in knowing and not punish the industry and others that don't want to be involved in the cost. I don't think there would be any additional cost because the people that want that market are already labeling for that market. It's already taken into account.
Thank you, Mr. Policinski and Mr. Dempsey. states like Vermont, are going off and doing their things like the mandatory labeling there. And we hope that that gets overturned in the courts, which some people are optimistic about. But what, if it doesn't, what is going to happen with companies such as yours that have labeling for the whole country? Are you going to create a separate label for Vermont? Where, if they end up, their law being upheld, are you going to run a separate run in your companies just for Vermont? Or are you going to basically say we're not going to sell in Vermont, which is what I would hope you would do, but...
Mr. Peterson, or Congressman Peterson, we haven't yet decided. I think Mr. Dempsey outlined the three choices very well. One is to stop selling to any individual state. Two is to relabel our products at considerable expense. Three is to re-engineer our supply chain and reformulate our products at even greater expense. None of those are good choices. All of those choices would result in either denying consumers access to products, which we wouldn't support, but they would also yield the other two choices, short of not selling in any one individual state, are much higher costs passed along to consumers. So I would agree with Mr. Dempsey's outline of the three basic choices. As a company, we haven't yet decided. There are no good choices in any of those. Let me outline as well that the idea of not selling a product in Vermont is also a very difficult choice, because we would be liable for any of our products that might find their way into Vermont. And the cost of that liability is extraordinary. I think the penalty is $1,000 per item. So even if you said you wanted to pursue that first option, it's really not a viable option, which is why we so strongly support a federal voluntary labeling law here.
I would agree. Obviously, we have, as I said, companies that are multi-category, multi-billion-dollar companies and small family-owned businesses. It's going to be much harder for that small family-owned business with one plant to do anything to adhere to the Vermont law, as well as sell their product across other states. So those options are much more limited for the small manufacturer, family-owned businesses than they would be for a multi-plant, multi-billion-dollar business. So I'd be repeating what we just already said to go further, but it would be a difficult decision for every company to decide what to do in Vermont.
Well, thank both of you. Mr. Fedorov, am I saying that right? If a voluntary non-GMO labeling program were to move forward, can we define what a GMO is so that the consumers would understand the label?
I would hope we could do a better job, because the label genetically modified is, as several people have pointed out, misleading. We've been genetically modifying crops and animals for many thousands of years. I think that Mr. Schmidt's suggestions are very good ones. Biotechnology is a little bit less of a negative buzzword.
Well, I think, I don't know where the GMO came from. I guess it was Europe, and there was obviously a purpose behind it. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Jim yields back. Mr. Gibbs for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a great panel, and I want to commend Mrs. Ledbeck for your work, and also young couple starting in the agriculture industry. That's commendable, and it'd be great. You see 2 kids, 2 and 3. It'd be great if more kids could grow up on the farm. It'd be great for our country, I believe. I want to kind of look back. A little perspective. Back in 1950, my understanding is the national corn yield was 50 bushel the acre. In 1975, 40 years ago, when I started farming, my goal was to have 100 bushel an acre. And now we're pushing 200 bushel an acre here nationally. Anything under 150 bushel would be considered a disaster. I know Land O'Lakes is shaking his head there. So, and what's been pointed out, this change from 1950 to 1975, where we doubled the production, I always contend it's from figuring out soil nutrient fertility, also hybrid selection, natural hybrid selection, and then I would contend from this period forward now, where we've pretty much doubled the yield again, it's because we've been able to select the genetics in a faster way, like Dr. Fedorov says we've been doing it for thousands of years, or at least in our perspective, 100 years or so. And so we've been able to identify those genes and do it exponentially in the lab. So there's really no difference. So that's one of the reasons why I think the scientists say it's safe, because we know what those genes are, we can identify them. But the benefits, we're growing, we're having 14 billion bushel corn crops a year now annually. On less acres than every year, it's less acres. So it's really a food security issue. We provide, American farmers provide the food for this country, and we also export a third of it. So it's a food security yield, but it's about yields. And if we didn't have what's happened in the last 20, 25 years of this yield, we would be having food shortages. Do you agree with that, Mr. Politkovsky?
Yes, I do. I think there's a tremendous productivity story here. In fact, versus 2.5 generations ago, we're growing 6.5 times more corn on 13% fewer acres. Yeah. We often talk about that in terms of per bushel yield, but I'll tell you there's a tremendous sustainability story there in terms of less water and land use, less crop protection and crop.
Well, I would say that when my 40 years now, I can just figure it out, it's been 40 years since I've been farming. The crop protection, the herbicides we used back then, had residual, they didn't break down, they weren't biodegradable. The crop protection we're using now, there's virtually, lots of them don't have any residual. I tell people that they come to my farm, it's interesting, you see my no-till soybeans out there, and we do a burn down application before we plant, and then sometime in June, we come through and we apply herbicide again, but we have to time it in such a way that it's done right before to kill those weeds that came up, and then when the soybeans get the canopy to provide the shade so the new weeds won't come, because there's no protection if we miss that timing. And so we're using safer herbicides, and we're increasing the yield and also protecting the environment that way. I would also go on to say that I agree with all of the panelists on the voluntary aspect, because better than 80% of the grain grown in this country, I think was mentioned, is genetically modified in the lab, and even though it's natural selection, it was just done in the lab, in my opinion. That you'd have to label everything if it's mandatory, genetically modified, which I think it just scares consumers, and it puts us country at a risk of food security, and it hurts the environment in the long run because we go backwards. So I would. So I support voluntary labeling. If a producer out there can find a niche market, I'm sure there's a market out there. We see it in organics, and they can demonstrate that it hasn't been modified in the lab, that they can have that market, but they can put on there that it's not. I'd say artificially modified, I don't know what the term is, but versus naturally hybrid selection like we did back in the 60s and 70s, in the 80s. So I want to commend you all for your testimony. I think Dr. Fedorov, go ahead.
What people don't realize is in the 20th century, we used chemical mutagens and radiation to hasten the mutation process. So there isn't back then just breeding, and now this artificial method. That's one point. The second point is that people have looked at the amount of genetic change that accompanies using these different techniques. And the evidence supports the conclusion that these are the safest and least disturbing techniques, whether you're looking at the genetics or the epigenetics. That's the kind of control level of genetic expression. So these really are the best techniques, the least disturbing, having the lowest probability of causing a problem that we've ever developed.
Well, thank you again for panelists and your good work. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman Joe Beck. Mr. McGovern for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and thank you all for your testimony. And let me begin by saying I think everybody's reading from the same sheet of music here. Right? Nobody here is in favor of mandatory GMO labeling. Am I correct? And I think if we're going to have a thoughtful discussion on this, we ought to have more of a diversity of opinion, at a hearing like this, because I think it is important to hear all sides of the subject. But let me begin by saying that I'm a believer in science. I rely on the scientists to give me informed information. That's why I believe in climate change as well. That's the subject of another hearing. But the point of the matter is that there's great value in our science. And so I'm not here to demonize GMOs or the technology behind them. I don't think anybody should be fear-mongering about GMOs. I don't think anybody should be threatening anybody who wants to, produce GMO crops or whatever. We ought to be able to have a more kind of a measured conversation on this. But I do believe in transparency, and I do believe people ought to have a right to know what they want to know. I think the consumers ought to have the right to know what they're eating and what they're feeding their kids, and how they use that information in their food choices is up to them, not up to us, but up to them. And I think there's great confusion with the labeling system now. I mean, I saw a poll from the Consumer Union that found 60% of consumers believe that products that say natural means non-GMOs, when in fact that's not the case. There are more consumers think natural means non-GMO than think organic means non-GMO. So, the current system, and even kind of a voluntary system, I think is lacking. We were told that, changing labels will cost food companies. Food companies change their labels all the time. So I think it's a false argument to say that labeling requirements will drive up the cost of food. I do believe there ought to be a national standard, because I do understand that a patchwork of various state initiatives is not in anybody's interest. But in response to the idea that if a product said, contains GMOs or whatever the label would be, that somehow that would discourage people from buying those products, you get 64 countries around the world already require labeling of GMO foods. Brazil, a country whose consumption patterns are similar to those in the U.S., has required GMO labeling since 2001. And from what I can tell, there's been no significant change in consumption patterns. But let me just raise one point here. I'm deeply troubled by Friday's announcement from the World Health Organization's International Agency for Research on Cancer that glyphosate, the herbicide most commonly used on GMO crops, is a probable human carcinogen. Now, IARC is made up of some of the most renowned scientists in the world, and if they're saying that glyphosate is a likely cause of cancer, I mean, that may be something that people want to know. So I guess my question is, because GMO corn and soybeans, for example, are designed to withstand glyphosate, the use of that herbicide has grown dramatically in recent decades, and given Friday's announcement, I mean, don't you think people should have the right to know how their food is grown and make their own decisions? Anyone who wants to?
Well, let me just respond, because I think there's a few things that I'd agree with. First, I agree there's great confusion in the marketplace right now, and state-level labeling laws would increase that. I agree that, and I think the Pompeo bill that was offered last year said we need to define natural, and that would be important to do. I think that a voluntary national standard would provide consumers with that choice and the information they need to make a decision. I think to do it the other way around and to mandate the label does stigmatize the ingredient and infers there's something that must be wrong with it, versus how we've done organic in a certified USDA organic program. We didn't ask all food to be certified non-organic to be able to communicate to consumers the value of the choice to make an organic food. So I think there's some agreement that we do have tremendous confusion, and that's why we support very firmly a national labeling legislation that has voluntary options. I do agree that we do need to define natural, and I think that's in the proposed legislation. But I don't agree that it should be mandatory, because I think that does stigmatize the.
Does anyone want to talk about the glyphosate finding? I mean, is that that's a legitimate scientific organization.
I'm glad to address that. That's not based on any new data, and it is not the case that there have been many, many studies on glyphosate. We do have an Environmental Protection Agency, and they require considerable testing. So that the organization has labeled it as
probable,
possible. Carcinogen doesn't mean anything's changed or any new data has been produced.
But I guess the point is, shouldn't consumers have a right to be able to know that? I mean, that's the.
If there is evidence that it's a carcinogen, yes, I think that's correct. But there have been so many studies over the years on this particular compound that have failed to identify any carcinogenic potential, that for one group to say, oh, well, it just might be, then do we put that on a label? I mean, this doesn't make any sense.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Gibson, for 5 minutes.
Well, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the hearing, and thank you to the panelists, too, for being here today. Look, I believe that people have a right to know what it is that they're consuming, and I'm also feel very strongly about science and recognize the fact that we've avoided famine because, as was mentioned, we've modified over the years. So I recognize that as well. And I represent 11 counties in upstate New York, and I'm a fervent and a strident advocate for my farmers. So I think ensuring the viability of our family farms is critical, a principle that we can't drop as we move forward, reconciling right to know and science. And so I thank Ms. Lidbeck for being here today, and thank you for your testimony. I also have tremendous faith in the American people, that empowered with information, I guess I don't agree with some of the assessments that they would change their consumption habits. I think that they'll make good choices. And so I just want to put that on the record too. As it relates to right to know, I might add that if we thought about it more broadly, I think we get fixated on labels immediately. Be interested in the panel's response to the possibility of right to know with an approach that provided details on modification on a website where individuals could go to get information. I'd be curious to know what their reaction would be to that technique.
Congressman, I'd like to respond to your question because I think there is a desire in the industry to engage with consumers around this great dialogue of where their food comes from. But we want to do it in a science and fact-based way. And I think this actually is part of that. Having an orderly federal law that's voluntary around labeling GMO products would create an environment that we can engage with consumers in a constructive way. And there's a number of things that are going on in a variety of industry associations, too, that I'm part of, National Council of Farmer Cooperatives and the Grocery Manufacturers Association, everything from facts up front to a discussion of how we can do exactly what you've described, to engage consumers in a dialogue which is bigger than a package panel, regarding where their food comes from, and help them understand that there are a lot of modern business practices that give us the safest, lowest cost, most abundant food supply in our history. So that's underway, and this is part of that process to create an orderly environment to engage consumers in that discussion.
Congressman, when we receive an order from a Japanese food company, it often comes with a list of 100 and some chemical residues that we're supposed to test for. Realistically, it would cost about $16,000 to $20,000 to test grain going into a container, which is more than the grain in the container would be. But that's because they're concerned about residues. I fully expect we will be asked to certify that we're delivering products that didn't have Roundup in it, glyphosate in it, within a matter of days. Everybody supports science-backed, but science doesn't speak with a single voice, and that confuses people. It is beyond my capability to know which scientific argument is right, so I prefer to make the distinction if enough people have asked for it, and let them decide, going to the internet and gathering what information from whatever source and making their consumer decision. Ultimately, I think the market will decide. The market's decided right now to pay a farmer $3.80 in Illinois for conventional corn, about $4.20 for non-GMO, and about $12.50 for organic. So the market's speaking with its dollars and asking people to perform. I think labels help in the grocery store, and science is an excellent foundation, the only foundation, but just what does science say is confusing.
I'd like to chime in. Congressman, I think I walked away from the subcommittee meeting last year feeling like absolutely consumers have a right to know. No one here is contesting that statement. And in fact, since then, more and more resources have popped up, just exactly the way that you've described them, website with good information, including one from my alma mater, Cornell University. It's a great website, the Alliance for Science. It explains a bit more in detail some of these growing processes and what the decisions, what the details are that lead to farmers making the choices to use the biotechnology that they do in their everyday practices.
Maybe I'd just like to make a point that addresses Mr. Clarkson's comment about how do we decide. In science, we have a concept called the weight of the evidence. If you have two studies and one says something's dangerous and one says it's not, you don't know what to decide. If 10 studies say it's not dangerous and one study says it does, you've got a pretty good chance of believing that one. If 100 studies or 1,000 studies say it's not dangerous and one still keeps saying it's dangerous, you're very comfortable going with the weight of the evidence, which is on safety. Now, when in this particular area of GMO, one study often gets disproportionate attention. There's a famous study by a man by the name of Seralini who claimed that glyphosate caused tumors in rats. The study was retracted, the data were terrible, but that dominates people's thinking. Should we bow to that, or should we go with the weight of the evidence?
Yeah, I know my time's expired, Mr. Chairman. I'll make one final comment, and that is that, I think that arming people with the information is really what we're talking about here.
My time's expired, really. We've got other folks, Chris.
You bet.
So, Ms. Kirkpatrick for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I have for the record a report that I would like to enter from Cardinal Peter Turkson, President of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace.
No, without objection.
I want to read a portion of that, and then I'll ask my question. He says, hunger in the world is a very serious injustice that shows fundamental disrespect for human dignity. Pope John Paul II called it the first and fundamental form of poverty. Persistent hunger, starvation, and malnutrition represent a global failure of humanity that, to our shame, has dragged on for decades. It is a plague and a long-term indicator of a system that does not function properly. Some point to the economic crisis of recent years as the reason why the world cannot do better, but that is just an excuse. Food insecurity has persisted for decades through prosperous times as well as more difficult times. And the panel, I want to explain to you, I represent the Navajo Nation in Arizona, where household food insecurity is above 75%. And so my question is, do you think it's possible to feed a world population of over 9 billion people without the use of genetic engineering and the full use of agricultural technology? And I'll just open that up to the panel, whoever wants to address that.
I'd be glad to offer my perspective, which is based on a few things, but I do agree that we've talked about this biotechnology and biotech traits in large part in farmer terms, yield per acre. We haven't done enough of a discussion around the benefits to the environment, less land, less water use, less crop inputs, more benign crop inputs. We haven't talked enough about it in terms of cost and the benefits to consumers, in terms of lower cost foods, because we get a crop. Just a couple of years ago, when we had the drought, we got a crop. The weather patterns were not that dissimilar from the late 80s when we didn't get a crop. So we don't talk enough about the benefits beyond yield per acre. I think you raise another benefit, and that is the ability to feed the soon-to-be 9 to 10 billion people on the planet in an increasingly productive and sustainable way and adapt to climate change along the way. I do not think we can feed that 9 to 10 billion people that are soon to be on the planet without chewing up a lot of natural resources, without biotechnology.
Anyone else on the panel want to comment?
I would, Congressman, appreciate your sentiment. And just for example, in our country alone, you must be aware that less than 2% of our population lives on farms. So in my opinion, we're going to need every farmer that we can get, organic, non-GMO, conventional, whatever it takes. And certainly biotechnology offers a tremendous amount of tools beyond genetic engineering in order for us to do the best that we can.
Anyone else?
Yes, I would like to address it. Today, we produce enough calories to feed everyone in the world a reasonable number, and it's a matter of unequal distribution of resources. Today, if you have the money, you can buy food. We're looking at a future where we do not know what the impact of climate change will be. It's already negatively impacting our productivity worldwide. There are still places in the world that productivity can be increased by conventional methods. But in the end, if we want to reduce the footprint of agriculture even further, and conventional breeding and mutagenic breeding has done a phenomenal job of reducing the required acreage to grow a certain amount of food. In the future, the real barrier is the ability of plants to collect sunlight and drive, to convert, it uses sunlight to convert air and water into foodstuffs. And the next breakthrough, the next big breakthrough has to be in the efficiency of photosynthesis. We can't do that by conventional techniques. We'll have to understand, we'll have to use all of the science tools that we have, including genetic modification of plants, to make the next big breakthrough that will allow us to reduce the footprint, make agriculture more sustainable, and yet continue to increase the food supply.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the testimony that you're giving us today, and I yield back.
Thank you, lady. Dr. Biotech, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the panel for being here today. Dr. Fedorov, are the changes that have been made through in the lab treatment of plants to change their properties any different than the way we've been doing it for thousands of years?
Yes, they're very much more precise, because in the last half century, we've learned more about what genes are, what they do in a different context than we ever knew before. So in a way, we were stumbling blind. We used chemicals and radiation kind of as a shotgun. Now we can take just one gene, we know what it does, or half a dozen genes, doesn't matter, but it's a small number of very well-defined genes that will confer new properties on plants and animals. That this is something we never could do before. Now, does that mean that we will never create a plant or an animal that is substantially different from what was before? No. So regulation really needs to be based on the properties of the organism, the environment it's going into, and what's being added. And all of that, I can't resist pointing out that that's exactly what the National Academy of Sciences recommended in 1987.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Mrs. Lindbeck, if you're exempt from the rules apparently in Vermont, is that correct?
Currently, yes.
So if you had to comply with those rules, would you be able to keep farming?
That's an interesting question. I mean, it sort of depends on what kind of ultimate, what kind of a price we would then be able to receive. So, for example, generally speaking, when you convert to be organic, you also are then able to collect an organic premium in the market. So, probably initially no, but if the change were to happen overnight, the increase in cost I detailed in my earlier statement would put us right out of business.
I guess I don't understand. There's labeling requirements in the state of Vermont, except that the Vermont producers don't have to, is it only certain producers don't have to comply, or is it all Vermont producers?
It's by industry, and it's really about the food product itself. So the dairy and meat would be exempt, as well as food sold in restaurants would be exempt from being labeled, whether it was produced using genetically engineered ingredients or not.
Okay, let me ask a question, this time of the panel, perhaps. Does anyone disagree that a voluntary labeling federal rule, would that not give consumers all the information they need to know? I don't understand the reasoning, any reasoning against that. Mr. Dempsey?
We do think that's exactly the case. I mean, we've got a template for that. The organic labeling has given the consumer who wants that product all the information they've needed. As somebody said earlier, we don't force companies to form labels that say non-organic, so that doesn't make much sense along that pattern that we would change anything different for GMO-free labeling. So I think the information's there on a voluntary basis. If somebody wants it, they seek it out and purchase that product.
Right, right. Does anybody else have a different opinion?
My view is that if more information were provided, if the law stipulated that you had to put together a lot more information to offer the consumer, then it would depend on who was doing it, how it was done, how accurate it was, and so forth.
All right. Thank you.
I would agree with, just let me add to Mr. Dempsey's statements, that I would agree we support the federal voluntary labeling program. I think it does allow us to provide consumers a choice, but importantly, it allows us to continue to engage with consumers in a dialogue regarding where their food comes from, which I think is important. I just don't think the front of the label is where it should be. And as I said earlier, there are a number of efforts going on in the industry, in individual companies and within industry associations to further that desire to engage with consumers around where their food comes from and the modern business practices that give us this great lowest cost, most abundant, safest food supply that we've had in our history.
Thank you. I'm out of time, it seems.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Aguilar, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lidback, in your testimony, you mentioned that the marketplace is already sorting out some of the non-GMO labeling without legislative mandates. I wanted to just get your feeling and your perception and that of your peers, I suppose, on the Whole Foods discussion that in 2018 they plan to have all their products in the U.S. and in Canada labeled. Can you give the committee your views on these kind of private sector-driven initiatives?
Thanks for your question. Yeah, it's a topic of oftentimes we talk about it a lot, my peers and I. And one of the frustrations we have is sort of this clash between providing factual information and wanting to market a product. And I think it was Mr. McGovern earlier talked about transparency and consumers wanting transparency when there are a lot of different conflicting ideas and statements out there. So, for example, a great example is in chicken. I just learned it's actually, you're not allowed to label chicken packages as antibiotic-free. You can use the terms grown without the use of antibiotics, but you can't label it antibiotic-free. Yet there are various restaurants in the country that will have on their menus antibiotic-free chicken. And so in my opinion, that's misleading the consumer. And so the Whole Foods effort to sort of to have a labeling initiative, I don't necessarily agree with it. I think they're listening to their customers, certainly, and they're trying to provide what they want. But at the same time, are they stigmatizing genetically engineered foods? And that's what the debate surrounds, I think.
Thank you. I appreciate the answer.
Let me just add to that many of the products, since I know what GMOs are on the market and what are not, many of the products that they're attaching that label to today are not genetically engineered, never have been. Okay, so it's basically deceptive marketing.
Thank you. Mr. Policinski and maybe Mr. Clarkson can also handle this next one. Sir, you mentioned earlier that there are some industry components. What I heard you say was there are some industry components within, possible legislation that you could support, such as the definition of natural, you mentioned, in addition to the voluntary labeling that we've heard extensively. What are some other policy components that you feel industry can get behind, showing consumers, as you mentioned, more about where their food comes from?
Well, I don't know if it's policy or not. I think policy that we've had in this country and our regulatory agencies have been very fact and science-based, and I think that needs to be continued. We need to be very fact and science-based in the policies that do come out and the regulations that do come out from our regulatory bodies, and I would say that needs to be continued, and in large part that's what we're talking about today. Other engagement, I think, that's going on is voluntary and by individual companies. And what I'm describing, and to some degree even your question about Whole Foods, is individual companies can choose to market how they choose to market, and consumers could choose to make their own decisions based on that. I do think that we are seeing a very healthy outgrowth of this conversation and others. Consumers are more interested in where their food is coming from, and I think we will see more, I know we will see more organizations on a voluntary basis provide that information in websites and through a variety of means. So I don't think that's a matter of policy. I think that's the individual companies trying to be very transparent with their consumers.
Sure, but one of the panelists just said that it was deceptive. So you're saying that we might gravitate toward that, but one of the panelists just mentioned that those efforts were deceptive. So
well, let me be clear. I'm not for deceptive marketing in any way.
Right. The record will reflect that.
That's right. But, and nor am I accusing anybody of that. I think the notion is just increased transparency of where your food comes from. There are a lot of modern business practices that contribute to, as I've said before, and I think we need to keep saying it, the safest, lowest cost, most abundant food supply in our history and arguably in the world. Biotechnology is just one of those modern business practices that yields that statement. There are other practices, such as advanced breeding on dairy farms, that lead to very efficient dairy cows that produce milk more efficient. There are a lot of practices that I think we need to talk more about.
Mr. Clarkson, you want the last moment?
Yes, Congressman Aguilar, one of the key policy issues is define what we mean by the term. When we end up with multiple definitions, the market is in great confusion. It causes trouble for all the players. Second thing is, in respecting the choice of one farmer to do something, then farmers who are neighbors need to work together. And it would be nice to have some policies that would encourage that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your answers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Allen from Georgia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, I appreciate the panel here and basically the comments that you've had about this particular issue. One of the things, Dr. Fedoroff, that I was sitting here thinking about is as far as the testing of these products. Are there any risks for consumers who choose organic?
Are there risks
Yeah.
to choose organic?
Yes.
Indeed. We share our pathogens with animals, and the primary tenet of organic farming is a prohibition on synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. They use green manure or cow manure or other manures.
Okay.
Okay, and as I said, we share our pathogens with animals, and a number of the food poisoning incidents are coming out of organic farming. The outbreak that killed some 50 people in Europe a couple of years ago was traced to organic bean sprouts.
Okay.
And this is something that people are just simply not aware of.
And that's
Now,
what my concern
properly
is.
treated manure is safe, but there's always that probability because there's no uniformity to that treatment.
Ms. Lindbeck, I grew up on a dairy farm, and the best decision that my dad made was to get out of that business. And here you are, first generation, and I applaud you. And I chose to be the cleanup person because I got to sleep a little later. And speaking of cow manure, I guess I'm in trouble there because that's what I did, is clean that place up every morning and every night. But I can tell you this, if they get too tough on you there in Vermont, you're welcome to come to the state of Georgia. And we'll do everything we can to help you do business down there. I take any other comments. What we want is a solution to this, and what is the federal government's role in this. We've got less about 2.5 minutes, and just open it up. What do we need to do on this?
Just one comment that Congressman Aguilar made that I think is important, and it's kind of overlooked in this committee or even in the whole discussion, and that is defining the term natural. Many of my member companies are in numerous litigation because of the different perceptions of what is natural and what is natural. And a part of the bill, my understanding is that it mandates a federal definition of natural. And certainly that is something that we would advocate very strongly that has to be done.
And of course, the corn would be totally unnatural by any definition, because we created it.
Right.
Congressman, not to be redundant, but I do want to come back to the Pompeo-Butterfield bill that was offered before. That, I think, by establishing a national voluntary standard does clear up confusion. It does provide consumer choice in the same manner that organic, USDA certified organic does, and it does preserve farmer choice. It allows the marketplace to determine then the size of those businesses and the size of the use of that technology. So I think there is a simple solution.
Okay. Yes, if I could also add, too, in terms of my testimony, in my history, earlier in my career, worked for the USDA's Food Safety and Inspection Service and worked with many talented regulators with the career staff, also at the Food and Drug Administration. And we've had a lot of discussion about, who knows, who do we trust? I mean, these are the people that tax dollars go to determine what is important health, nutrition, and safety information. As many have testified, can regulate within the current needs, and there can be more legislation, but in the meantime, those are the folks who make those important decisions. Otherwise, there's chaos out there if we let everybody make those delineations.
Well, that's why I asked the question about the organic side. It seems like the GMO is kind of on everybody's radar, and so let's let everybody know what's going on, because the consumer does need to know, and the consumer needs to have the ability to make that choice. Thank you very much, and I yield back the remainder of my time.
Chairman yields back. Mr. Scott for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This has been a fascinating hearing. I think that basically what this boils down is that we have, because all of the consumers need to know what's in the food. It's basically whether it's one national standard or state by state. But there's another issue here that pervades, that runs from the farmer, the producer, all the way up to the consumer, and that's economics. And I think, Mr. Dempsey, you hit two very important points that I think we need to pay a little attention to. You mentioned in your statement that, one, half of your businesses in your association earn less than $500,000 a year, or should I say, I think it was $100 million gross. And the other point was, which means they're basically small businesses, and the other point was that in some of these communities, that particular business is the primary source of employment. So I think we ought to look at these two and how they basically impact. So tell us just how critical is the need for the federal government to intervene here with the national standard, rather than, as it seems to be, a state-by-state approach. What is that economic impact on the jobs and on small businesses?
Thank you, Congressman. As I said, most of our businesses are smaller, family-owned businesses, second, third, fourth generation. The snack industry itself was a very regional, localized business, so that you've got a lot of small manufacturers who are employing the main employers in the manufacturing process in their areas. To be able to basically navigate a list of state laws would take additional people, additional costs, or painful decisions to say, to exit a certain market. And in many cases, those markets are the markets on the border that they'd have a hard time complying with state-by-state laws, especially if those laws have different nuances and different regulations. So the hard decisions are, do you sell or do you stop manufacturing and walk away?
Okay, so the impact would be considerable.
The impact would be considerable both in more warehouse space, more SKUs, more film, a greater distribution burden based upon more SKUs on a truck. It would be significant, yes.
All right, Mr. Polinsky.
Yes.
Polinsky.
Perfect.
Wonderful. Tell me, we haven't discussed much, but tell me about science-based. What exactly is science-based voluntary labeling, and just how critical is a voluntary label to your business?
Yes. Well, first, I think science-based, Dr. Fedorov did a good job talking about, science-based decisions and how they're made. I think that as it relates to this topic of biotechnology and traits, biotech traits, clearly the weight of the science is that the technology is safe. And that has been reinforced by a variety of agencies over 20 years, thousands of studies. So that's the first point. And our company is very interested in that, as is the entire food industry. Secondly, the voluntary national labeling standard in the Pompeo-Butterfield bill just makes order out of a potentially chaotic situation of state-by-state labeling. That is, as you've heard from Mr. Dempsey, a situation that's not just another label. It's often characterized as that. And we do have products on the marketplace that are modified at the end of the system for a new flavor, for example. But this change would extend all the way back through the food supply chain, right to the farm, the seeds that are chosen, the inventory of the seeds that are carried, the segregation of the crop, the transportation and distribution of a separate crop, the storage of those raw materials at our factories in separate facilities or storage areas, and then the segregation of the manufacturing process, where we would have to run one technology and then clean the lines and run another technology. I haven't yet gotten to the forward segregation of the supply chain when we ship and distribute goods to the grocery store, which again would require segregation. So the reason we're so supportive of a voluntary national labeling standard, the Pompeo-Butterfield bill that was offered last year, is it makes order out of that potential chaos or complexity and saves cost.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Jim and Joe back. Mr. Bosch, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first off, we probably went down this earlier, but I've been bouncing in and out of the room. And Mr. Polinsky, I would like to know, if I can, what your company is already, because Vermont's already passed the law. Are you preparing already, and what are those costs that you're seeing and everything for one state, and how you're going to handle it? Because I know we've talked about 3 different options that could be available. And where are you going with that at this time?
Congressman, we did talk about this, and the bottom line is we have not decided. There are no good choices. The 3 choices that are often mentioned are don't ship to that state. Well, let me remind you that it's Vermont right now, but there's 26 states pending legislation. Yes. Secondly, labeling or segregation, the second and third choices, are difficult and costly, as I just tried to explain. I also want to outline, and you may have been out of the room when we talked about this, that the idea of not shipping to a state like Vermont is really a non-starter, in my opinion, because of the legal liability. Let's say that was a choice we made, which I'm not advocating that. We would still be held accountable for the fact that any of the products we might ship to neighboring states would show up in Vermont. And the penalty there is substantial. I believe the Vermont legislation has a penalty of $1,000 per day per SKU. It's a very substantial penalty. And by the way, that's enforced by the Vermont Attorney General's office, not the usual regulatory bodies that we work with, because it's a violation of their law. So this is a very onerous situation. And all these paths, there are no good decisions there. They're all higher cost decisions.
Mr. Dempsey, did you want to?
Let me just add that supermarkets are national in scope as well. So the decision not to sell in Vermont is more complicated by how you bring your product to market, whether it's DSD, direct store delivery, or through warehouse distribution. If you're shipping product into an Ahold store in Massachusetts, a Stop and Shop, the chances of that product being sent erroneously to Vermont are magnified many times, so that you've got supermarkets that are operating in 4 or 5 or 6 different states, but the burden, at least in Vermont's law, is on the manufacturer to make sure that your product is not in those shelves. It really becomes a liability to the manufacturer to even ship to a grocery store who's doing business in many states. So there's a whole bunch of repercussions that come out of that system. So,
just to continue, and maybe even a statement as I'm continuing questions. As this product, as we deal with GMOs, okay, in our own family, we have had to deal with gluten-free. My wife is gluten-free. Companies automatically, voluntarily, mark their products as gluten-free to encourage the sales of those to those who are. What would be the difference here in this, proposing that it would be a voluntary?
a broader statement is that companies make products to sell them. And whatever they can do to sell them, to entice the consumer to purchase them, they're going to do, whether it's to go for organic certification or whether it's to go for GMO-free or to manufacture products that are gluten-free. That information for that segment of the market is available from a marketing perspective of those companies. I see no difference between that and labeling everything else that this does contain gluten, which is already in the nutritional.
That is in the product. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Chairman yields back. Mr. Walsh for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for your testimony. I think it's appropriate. We're here tomorrow, March 25th, would have been the 101st birthday of Minnesota graduate and researcher Norman Borlaug. So the discussion we're having falls directly into that, and I'm appreciative of all of your time and effort. I would point out, and we're trying to get the heart of this, our responsibility in Congress and our responsibility, I would argue each of you, is to define a problem, gather the information, and then make correct assumptions to that. And that's what we're trying to get at. A January 2015 Pew Research Center study came out and showed that 89% of scientists believe that GMOs are safe, yet 37% of the public did. And I'm going to come back to this. Yes, it is the 800-pound gorilla in the room, but the science and the preponderance of the evidence on this seems to warrant where we're headed. And we can get into this issue that with Norman Borlaug's position, with 12 billion people on the horizon for 2100, with the idea of how we're going to feed these people. But the problem we've got in this place is you can't be selective when the preponderance of the evidence shows something. And we do that. And there better be some soul searching on both sides of the aisle on this, is to let the science and the research drive us to come up with conclusions that work. And it's important, both for consumer safety and sense of fairness. And I think the point was brought up, and Mr. Clarkson's point about ratcheting down the rhetoric is exactly it. But what I would make the argument, and I respectfully say that the chairman will run his committee as he wants to, the questions that Mr. McGovern brought up, there should be some dissenting voices here, or we end up in the situation like the outlandish situation in Florida where state officials can't talk about climate change. Well, you give a perception that there's something you don't want people to talk about. The evidence is clearly here that this is a way to feed people. It always has been. It's as much about Mesopotamia as it is about Monsanto. And that's the discussion that we have to have, and have fairly, so that we can make good decisions. And I am just troubled that we will go down a road. And there's some interesting things. Ms. Federoff, you brought up a good point. This one has always gotten me a little bit. Orange juice, for example. The Florida citrus folks, and they want to sell them, they label no GMOs on there. There are no GMO oranges. But here's the thing. There may need to be soon with the greening, the citrus greening disease that's coming, so they may regret that decision that we're going to end up with those, I think, eventually because of this new entrance into the environment. So I applaud all of you for being here. I would ask my colleagues, this gives us an opportunity to reset on some of these things. You can't say, wow, the preponderance of the evidence and the scientific consensus is nearly whole on this issue, and then walk to another committee room and have the exact same folks. Now, I get it. There's 11% of scientists here. I bet you they're not agronomists that are part of that. And to bring in someone else in an unrelated field and use that is the outlier, as Dr. Federoff said, and we're going to base our decisions on that, because I would make this argument here is
feeding the world's population, continuing to advance, continuing to do the things you do as feed, clothe, and power the world, is going to involve a simultaneous discussion on climate change as it deals also with GMOs. And I wish we would have the maturity, the ability to be able to do what you all have clearly laid out today. And Ms. Lidbeck, I apologize for those people who would question you because you have the audacity to talk about the science. Trust me, it happens on other issues too, unfortunately. But your willingness to come here and speak about this and talk about it, and I think the powerful thing here is just hearing this, the organic folks can make 3 times more. Well, good for them if they're going to be able to, and that's where we're at. That we're not trying to stop that, but I think it's an important point and an important discussion that we cannot drive policy, whether it's on labeling or how we go about things, that is not based on the evidence, that's not based on the research, because that will lead to bad outcomes all the way around. So I want to thank each of you for being here. I want to ask my colleagues to have the courage to discuss these things as they are, and then to come up with good solutions. And that's shouldn't be all that difficult. The good news here is that our producers continue to be the most productive in the world, our researchers continue to be the most innovative, and we are able to provide the most abundant, safest, affordable food supply in the world, and we can do that around the world. So this is an important discussion. It's broad, it's important, and I applaud each of you for continuing to bring it to the forefront, and hopefully we'll get a good solution for you and for the consumers. Thank you.
Chairman yields back. Mr. Emmer for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first to the panel, thank you for being here, and I apologize. I had to step out and come back. This is quite an operation in this place. You have several meetings all at the same time in different buildings, and there must be a better way to run the train station. Be that as it may, I respect your time. I listened to my colleague from Minnesota talk about there should be dissenting voices in the room. I think most of us would agree that if the world would just agree with our position, it would be a much better place to live in, but that doesn't happen. And I think, somebody can correct me, but I think it was Bobby Kennedy that said something to the effect that if you can get the American public 80% of the American public to agree on anything, that should be considered unanimous. And in this case, when you've got 90% of the science out there agreeing, I think that's pretty close to being unanimous. I want to go at this very quickly from a different, again, forgive me if somebody's already done this. I wasn't here, so please be patient with me. I want to go at it from the specific costs and break it down by level. Mrs. Lidbeck, you're running a dairy operation. You've got costs that are going to be added on for, you talked about the inputs when I was here earlier. You were talking about the cost of feed. Aren't there other costs in terms of having to manage and record, get inspections, certification? Have you talked about those already today?
No. No, and so beyond the feed, I mean, to keep milk segregated from cows fed non-GMO feed versus feed with GM, you'd have to put in a second bulk tank, and you have to put in a second grain bin, and so you're talking about capital expenditures, and right. As you can imagine, on a 50-cow dairy, there's really not a whole lot extra left to go around to sort of fulfill those needs, so that kind of consideration might be a deal breaker for us.
Well, and I was just thinking, labor, you and your husband are going to have some more kids in order to do this thing. Mr. Dempsey and anybody else, I want to go to the next level because we've got the processors, those that have to put these products out. You talked about 2 lines. But it's much greater than that, isn't it? Aren't you going to have to hire all kinds of new staff to keep track of all these things, and then there's storage costs?
Yes, the answer is the 2 lines referred to just having one state that mandated the labeling and everybody else who didn't. So there's significant input depending on the number of states who have different regulations. But yes, all up and down the line, as we talked, our grain is kept in masa, is kept in separate silos. They have to have separate silos for that. The distribution charges would be significant because you have to keep track of various different streams of products going to different states, the same product, but labeled differently. So the multipliers in cost come up with how many different labels you have to keep and how many different infrastructure you need to build to hold those.
And very quickly, because this just adds, it compounds as you go each level. And I wouldn't be fair if I didn't go to the Minnesota guy with the time that I have left. Mr. Policinski, you know, farmers are interested in operating a business, raising their families. They want to produce quality product that can be sold the world over. I imagine, and the farmers that I know, they don't much care for the litigation system if they can stay away from it. What are the concerns and the costs that could be put into this at every level when you talk about the legal ramifications? Aren't those just as big?
Yes. First, you know, farmers are pretty savvy businessmen, and they've adopted this technology at record pace. Of all the technologies over all the years, this has been the one that's been adopted by farmers the most quickly, and it's because they see the benefits so clearly to their operations, to the environment, less land and water, and to cost to consumers. So I think farmers have voted. What we're trying to do here in the discussion is preserve their choice of how they want to farm, as well as provide consumer choice. And again, the Pompeo-Butterfield legislation that was proposed clearly affords that opportunity through developing a national standard and a voluntary national standard. I think your comment on legal cost would pass through the system to ownership, and in our instance, we are a farmer-owned company.
Right.
We did have a discussion a couple of times now on how onerous it is to have a state law or a series of state laws, and if you chose not to serve those areas, the implications of legal liability would be very onerous.
And at the end of the day, it all gets passed on to the consumer. I'm sorry, Mrs.
No, Mr. Kay, I just wanted to add, Mr. Eimer, I mean, when I was trying to locate a non-GMO source for grain, I first, of course, started my own grain company, and they simply don't have the capacity either. They're already satisfying an organic grain distribution system as well as conventional. So they don't have the capacity for a non-GMO option either.
And again, thank you all. My time has expired. Mr. Chair, and to the ranking member, thank you for having this meeting, because it seems like everybody here is interested in a win-win for everybody.
Thank you. Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Costa, 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I think this is not only a critical issue here in our country, but also as it relates to the labeling issues. A critical issue as we negotiate these trade agreements, both with the European allies and as well as in Asia. Mr. Schmidt, was interested in your comments earlier on in terms of the polling sampling that you have taken and undergone. And what it really made me think about, and Dr. Is it? Fedorov, is our lack of education in terms of the consumers as to it relates to risk assessment and risk management. And if it were not for all of the efforts that we've been able to employ over the last post-World War II with our food and food safety, we would not get the longevity or the healthy lifestyle that we've been able to achieve. And while we have problems with obesity and other things, it's more of a related to choices people make, poor choices that people make, as opposed to the quality of the food that we have. How do you think we do a better job in educating folks about the better level of quality and the technologies that have been employed to make foods healthier and safer today?
Well, thank you. I think you've identified, some of the things that have come forward today, that this is not a science debate or a safety debate. It's come down to a communications debate. And sometimes, as you indicated, people are faced with fear and risk, and it's almost become a cult following among some to oppose this technology without any demonstration of actual harm or safety risks. And so there needs to be even more leadership, I think, from whether it's Congress and the administration, from the industry, from academia, to speak up, to have the bravery like Mrs. Lidbeck to be steadfast with the facts. And there's strength in numbers, so the more people that are supporting this.
A lot of the food processors and other companies and agricultural associations have tried to do an education. I don't think it's been well coordinated. but we do see that on occasion. When you talked about 97% of the scientists, was that the number you used, Dr. Fedorov? Talking about the efficacy of genetically modified foods, yet the perception obviously is not that in terms of the notion of safety?
Indeed. This is the Pew poll addressed scientists across the board. That includes physicists and psychologists and economists and so forth. If you polled the kinds of biologists who have used these techniques, I think you'll be closer to 100%. But that's not the issue. I think, as Mr. Schmidt identified, it's more about communication. And the problem is that our current system, which has very big regulatory costs to get a GM product to market, prevents academic scientists in public research institutions from getting genetically modified.
Well, and this is a real
fruits and-
challenge, especially in Europe right now. I mean, while we have a process for it, we've only been able to register a limited amount, and it's a lengthy and cumbersome process.
Correct.
And trying to get agreement on the best science is always a challenge. And in some cases, let's be frank, it's used for basically leverage purposes as it relates to trade.
Absolutely. But let's just talk about here in the U.S. If we could manage to make the process less onerous based on the accumulation of almost 40 years of research now, it would be possible to get genetically modified fruits and vegetables. So a colleague of mine in England has developed a beautiful wine red tomato, which is better for you because it has the same kinds of compounds in it that you have in blackberries and blueberries, which are good for you.
Yeah.
When people,
My time's almost up.
okay, so familiarity, we
I
don't have
know.
those products in the market.
Mrs. Lebeck, as a person that grew up on a Portuguese dairy farm, I just want to commend you for your efforts and encourage you to stay with it, notwithstanding the efforts. I too know what to do with my father never learned to use the word manure because it just wasn't in the vocabulary. But I grew up in that same setting that you and your family, and I want to commend you and encourage you for your efforts and your courage to testify here today.
Gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Yoho for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Costa, being a veterinarian, large animal practitioner that earned a living on the south end of a northbound horse or cow, it wasn't manure, it was fertilizer until it hit the ground. I appreciate you all being here, and I think we, as the people in government, because government's a non-entity, it's only as good as the people that are involved in it and all branches of it, that we need to do a better job on educating both us in government and the public on educating people and in public venues to get the best, the current, and the correct information out to the public that is updated and it's based on peer-reviewed science and it's stemming from, accurate research. And we also need to do a better job of making current the information and policies on a website of what a GMO is and what it is not. And keep agendas or politics out of it and let the facts speak for themselves. Dr. Fedorov, if you could take us briefly through the process of taking a genetically modified product from the beginning to the market in less than a minute, I'd be greatly appreciative if you could. But just the research that goes behind that before it's approved.
Okay, let me try to summarize it really quickly. So to begin with, you have to identify the gene that you want to introduce. You have to introduce it into the organism. This is not a trivial process for a plant such as corn. You make a lot of these, put them in the greenhouse, figure out which ones, and take bits of the plant and you analyze it genetically by DNA sequencing and so forth. But then you have to do everything from testing the product of the gene for toxicity and allergenicity to putting together all of the dossiers that are required by the various agencies that need to approve that product. In some cases, it has to be the EPA, the FDA, and the USDA.
And the USDA.
Okay? And in the case of animals, genetically modified animals like Equibani salmon, it's even more onerous because the FDA has decided to regulate them like drugs.
And I think what you've done is adequate because it's years of research, years of studies, years of feed studies, and then, you know, the tissue samples and all those things that come with that. And it costs millions, if not billions of dollars. And it finally does get the approval of the USDA, the FDA, the EPA. We've got a variety in Florida of a papaya that they've been working on for 10 years for ring spot virus. The EPA signed off on it, but yet it's still not to market because of this GMO scare around it, and it needs to be approved. And, you know, with the studies, are you aware of any peer-reviewed, real studies that you know of that have proven to be deleterious or detrimental effects on humans, animals, plants, or the environment of a product?
There are occasional...
What was that?
None.
I just wanted to hear it again so
Yes.
everybody heard that. None.
None. There are occasional anecdotal reports.
Anecdotal.
Very often, the publication is retracted or never gets published, but gets into the, you know, the social media and the internet and stuff.
Let me ask you guys all this. Would a GMO that had any deleterious effects to humans, animal, plants, or the environment ever get approved by the USDA, FDA, or EPA? So there's really, the science is on our side on these labelings. It's a marketing thing. So if a GMO has been approved by the USDA, one should rest assured that that product is as safe as any non-GMO product, or it wouldn't be out there. In addition, we've been doing GMOs for 20, 30, 40 years. Mother Nature's been doing it since the beginning of time. We would not have wheat had the plants not cross-pollinated to form the wheat we have today. And tomatoes, as we know, comes from a toxic source. So do potatoes, the Solano family. And they're toxic. They're related to nightshade.
You bet.
Yet through genetic modification of Mother Nature, they've healed themselves, and we have what we have. And if we didn't have the GMOs today, I would hate to think what the food security of this world would be. You know, in my home state of Florida, when I graduated from veterinary college, we produced about 75 bushels of corn. That was a great yield. Today, we're doing 250 to 275 bushels of corn on poor soil. And therefore, the common sense of the sound science that leads to the approval of the GMOs should not be overshadowed by the environmental McCarthyism of, you know, the anti-GMO crowd. And I just want to thank you for out there, for being in the fight and for standing up. Ms. Lidback, like you, last time when we talked about this, we got a lot of hate mail. Hang tough, because you're on the right side of the science. Thank you.
Ms. Adams.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our guests today. There's been a lot of confusion over what qualifies as a label for food that contains ingredients derived from a GMO. Consumers, I believe, deserve to know what's in their food, but it's also necessary that FDA implement regulations to ensure that the labeling of GMO products is fair, it's standardized, and transparent. Market-driven labeling ensures that the information they demand about the food being sold is clear and accurate without the confusion of dozens of different labels. Mr. Clarkson, your testimony indicated that the best way to support consumers is through a national standard that includes a voluntary labeling program. So if the program is voluntary, how long would you expect for retailers and producers to begin participating in the program?
Well, there are quite a few retailers and processors participating in private programs right now that I think would quickly switch to a national definition enforced by the USDA. So I would expect within a year you would see very significant movement toward the national standard usage.
Okay. As a follow-up, GMO crops are often blanket sprayed with high amounts of herbicide since they can survive being drenched in Roundup. So this washes into lakes and streams, and Mother Nature eventually takes its course and weeds become resistant to Roundup. Thus, the use of more toxic herbicides is necessary for both GMO and non-GMO varieties. So how can we work with farmers to take land out of production and improve crop rotation so that weeds don't become resistant to herbicides so quickly?
That would involve using multiple approaches to weed control rather than a single approach. It would involve rotations of crops. It would involve use of cover crops, all of which are projects that are underway, and we're starting to see benefits from those.
Okay. Mr. Smith, last summer, your group conducted a survey to gauge Americans' views of foods containing bioengineered ingredients. How do consumers view the current FDA policy allowing voluntary labeling for food products through biotechnology?
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Adams. Our survey found that 63% of U.S. consumers support the current U.S. FDA policy that says that there should not be any special labeling of foods produced through biotechnology unless there's a change in the content of nutritional content, introduction of a safety issue such as an allergen, and even then you would identify what that change was, not the process used to produce the product. And so Americans do, so it's a case of when you explain information and give consumers credit, they tend to understand it and support it.
All right. Thank you very much. Mr. Chair, I yield back.
Thank you for being here, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll try to be brief. One of my concerns is not only that this labeling stop at the state level, but that you could actually see individual counties and municipalities trying to come up with their own labeling standards, and therefore you have 6, 7, 8 different standards in any given state. That would obviously have a tremendous impact on the business owners, the grocery retailers on one side of the county line or city limit sign versus those who are on the other side. I would typically steer towards states' rights on these issues. This is one where I do believe that without a uniform standard, we're going to see tremendous increases in the cost of groceries for the American citizen. I'll also tell you, I think that this is a perception issue, and is the more times we use the initials GMO or genetically modified, the worse it is for us. The term biotechnology, I think, is a more accurate description of what we're using to get crops where we actually use less pesticides and less herbicides. We don't want to put those things on our land. They cost money to apply them, and we as farmers want a clean environment as well. But it's interesting, this past week as I listened, my wife and I were blessed to have a little girl, and I listened to the midwife as she was talking about groceries and making sure that they had no GMOs, and at the same time she turned around and recommended a tremendous sum of things that were also products of biotechnology. And my wife suggested I shouldn't say anything to her because she might be delivering our daughter, but now that our daughter's here, I think I'm free to say some of those things. But the misperception out there has got to be addressed. Biotechnology has made our life better, whether it's through pharmaceuticals or whether it is through our crops. And if I go to the Land O'Lakes website, I can look in Land O'Lakes butter, and I know exactly what is in the products that I'm consuming. This isn't about what's in the products that we eat. It's about what's in the seed that's planted. And I wonder if the same advocates for the labeling of our food supply, why aren't they suggesting that it should be done in our pharmaceutical supply as well? Because those are the things that we ingest. So again, just reiterating, and Mr. Smith, I'll go to you since we're down to 2 minutes. The use of biotechnology for our food and agriculture and pharmaceutical products has made our lives better. We're living longer than we ever have. Americans eat hundreds of millions of meals a day, literally. And my question is, how would it impact our ability to provide affordable and nutritious food to the American families And would it not raise the cost of food, thereby hurting low-income Americans more than anybody, if we are not able to come up with a uniform labeling standard?
Yes, sir. Well, I'll have to say, we have not done the economic studies ourselves, but I think you've heard some very compelling testimony from the panel regarding the economics of this. And, I just think in general, everyone wants to provide informed choice for consumers, but that word informed is critical. And too often, I think we're allowing misinformed choices out there by not standing up and correcting misinformation in the marketplace. So that's the opportunity to be transparent, to provide as much information as possible that meets consumer interest and demand, while also keeping the marketplace fair for accurate information on food and nutrition.
Do you see any movement to label anything other than agricultural products with this same type of skull and crossbones, if you will?
Yeah, as a communications group, we hear ideas about labeling lots of different things. We know other industries. I think there's been some discussion about the alcohol industry, some calling for labeling there as well. So, you can ask consumers in general, would you like X to be labeled? And if you make it sound scary enough, everyone's going to say yes. And that's the thing about technology. It's easy to make it sound scary. Maybe it's less interesting to say that it's safe and effective, but those are the facts.
Well, I think that the fact that Americans eat hundreds of millions of meals a day, and we spend less for food than virtually any other industrialized nation out there, is proof that what we've been doing is working. And if it wasn't, our life expectancy wouldn't be continuing to expand. So, thank you very much for being here. With that, I'll turn it back over to the big chairman.
Well, I want to thank the panel for being here today. Ms. Federoff, a couple of things. One, I thought you were about to finish your comments about Roundup, and also from responding to Ms. Adams' comments about, she made some question about Roundup or Lucas Fate that you were going to answer. Did you have any comments about that one study that came out, I guess, Friday?
Only that the preponderance of studies shows it to be safe and not carcinogenic. The current ruling of the UN body, the cancer IACR, something like that, is not based on any new information.
Okay. The overall weight, just to be crystal clear, the overall weight, preponderance of the evidence is that, and I'm going to get with Mr. Schmidt, I'm going to use your bioengineered, genetically engineered. The weight, Ms. Federoff, Dr. Federoff, is that it's safe, and that it's. I'm just using reference to Mr. Schmidt because he told me to use something other than GMO because that's apparently pejorative.
He wants you to.
I'm still sticking with you, Dr. Federoff. The preponderance of the science is that bioengineered.
The food, the current biotechnologically altered food crops and potentially animals are as safe as their non-GM counterparts. Right. I'm afraid that GM label is going to stick. It's the fastest thing to call it.
I got you. Well, again, I thank the panel for coming today and spending your time with us. Ms. Lidbach, I hope it doesn't repeat your experience from last year. And if it does, well, it's a shame. It's unfortunate because we can all have differences of opinion. Dr. Federoff, you said those opinions ought to be based in fact. We don't have any requirement for that, but it ought to be the case, and we hope that this hearing today sheds some light on a really important issue. Under the rules of the committee, the record of today's hearing will remain open for 10 calendar days to receive additional material and supplementary written responses from the witnesses to any questions posed by a member. This hearing of the Committee on Agriculture is adjourned.